The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
If I give them time and space, they'll find something to do, and it will always be educational.
What if the classroom could be a dahlia farm, a converted bus, a forest, or a lounge? Meet 6 families across New Zealand as they contend with the challenges and joys of education outside the bounds of a traditional classroom.
You're being taught by the people who love you.
Watch Home Education on the Spin-Off today, made with the support of NZ On Air. Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spin-Off, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
Where did that come up? How did that come up? How did that become a story?
Well, it actually came up at the nexus of the two things, which was that Chris Luxon said that he would be open to banning the Zig Hail because the gangs do it. He's like, they have ruined
okay.
it. Ruined
It's
this.
bad. It's bad now. Halloween is ruined.
Oh, fuck.
Tēnā koutou katoa. It's gone by lunchtime. I'm Toby Manhire. With me today, very exciting lineup. Annabelle Lee-Mather, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ben Thomas, kia ora.
The gang's all here.
Te Butler is making the magic happen, and he is wearing, because it's Halloween, he's wearing a Ghosts t-shirt.
Spooky.
Is that deliberate? Is that
No,
an
it's
accident?
complete accident.
It's the Toby Morris t-shirt.
It's a Toby Morris special, and it's thematically appropriate.
Wow.
Shit, it's Halloween today.
Yeah. Annabelle Lee-Mather
This
has come dressed as Ray Gunn, the Australian breakdancer, looking dashing. Ben Thomas, you've come dressed as a lobbyist, a Wellington lobbyist. It looks like.
This is really stressful for me. This is the first time for a long time, I've lived in a house that's quite accessible from the street and probably looks quite welcoming to children. So I don't know what
And you've probably got heaps of cobwebs you haven't dealt with over your architrave.
Yeah, that's right. My poor maintenance is coming back to bite me. But normally, you could kind of get away with it by sheltering in the back room and turning off lights and, but I don't know.
You can do that. I've come dressed as the wormhole chiseled in the space-time continuum on May 31, 2025, when the Deputy Prime Minister handover happens from Winston Peters to David Seymour. Today we've got a sort of grab bag of things to talk about, bits and bobs, a bits and bobs pod. We'll see how we go. We might cover along the way a bit of Darleen Tana, a bit of Richard Prebble on the Waitangi Tribunal, maybe a little bit of Andrew Bailey, maybe even a little bit of Mike King.
We'll range around the political landscape like Lawrence of Arabia or Andrew Bailey traversing the desert on a camel.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
We'll start, though, with a subject that I think we've already explained has not been covered enough, if at all, the American election, which is next week. Isn't it, Annabelle? Have you been absorbed in American election stuff? Are you one of those people who listens to 25 podcasts that tell you the same thing?
I actually can't remember a time when I have cared less about the outcome. Of an American election. I just do not give a single shit.
Interesting. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised to hear that.
I should be the most invested I've ever been, given that it's, the first, it's not the first time a woman's run, obviously, but the first time a woman of colour has run. But I really just do not care because I think that she has basically been completely intellectually dishonest and morally bankrupt in her position on Palestine, and I just can't get on board that waka. Not to mention she's like a gun-toting, fracking-loving supporter. So, yeah, I think that probably there's a lot of other people and Americans that feel the same way, and so that's probably why Trump is going to win the election. In my view, I think a lot of people just won't turn up to the polls because it's too, what do you want, cyanide or arsenic?
Ben.
Yeah, I mean, as a complete outsider to American politics with no sort of inside information, I would tend to think that Annabelle's right, that that we, as in the citizens of the world, as in the psychographic landscape of humanity, will get Trump again. I actually think it is interesting because with that sort of line of thinking, which you see a lot online as well, which is, it doesn't really matter. Harris has been, appalling on on what's happening in Gaza. But then you sort of think, what is voting? Is it an expression of your own sort of moral status? Is it something to affect change in the world? And then you kind of think, well, there's a collective action problem. One individual's vote doesn't really do that much, but of course in aggregate it does, especially in those swing states. And it is interesting because, of course, a big question, I guess, in American politics back in the 2000s with Bush, was, that book, What's the Matter with Kansas? Why are middle class or poorer Americans in flyover states voting against what was seen as their interests to vote for George Bush? And increasingly in time, especially with Trump, we've seen that a lot of it is this sort of reverse polarization or negative polarization, where a lot of people are just voting to express sort of outrage and sort of own the libs, on that Republican side. And I can't help but get the feeling that for a lot of, the progressives who might be sitting it out, it's almost, they're voting against their own interests domestically, at least, to own one person, which is Kamala Harris, which seems, I don't know, it's an interesting kind of dynamic, I think. But I mean, the main reason I'll be praying for the no Trump comeback is the writer George Saunders wrote an essay in, I think, 2006 called "The Brain Dead Megaphone," and it was meant to be a metaphor for sort of the 24-hour, 24/7 media cycle and Fox News and CNN and the entertainment media news complex. And his analogy was a short, angry man with a megaphone walks into a party and sits up in one corner and just starts spewing out sort of nonsense and conspiracy theories and talking about people he hates and things he's mad at. And some people engage and argue with him, and some people try and ignore him. But even the people who try and ignore him, eventually they'll just start talking to people about this guy and how annoying he is because you can't get away from it. And the interesting thing is, I thought it was a very simplistic, basic sort of allegory when he wrote that essay back in 2006. But what's fascinating about, modern technology and the modern landscape is by 2015, that could literally just be a guy. It didn't have to be the media context. It was literally one guy who sort of has monopolized the world's attention and sort of psychic energy. And I just want it to end.
I think, to be fair, that it's that for many people who won't show up to the polls, it's not necessarily because they want to own Kamala or punish her. I think it's more that they don't want to be complicit in supporting an ongoing genocide. And I'm really interested to see what the results will be in terms of how much support, how much vote Jill Stein wins. I think it's such a, it's a two-party system over there, so it's really hard for a candidate like her to break through. So I think it'll be fascinating to see what the voter turnout is and also how much goes to some of those other candidates, but particularly her.
I mean, the fascinating thing about this election, more than anything I can remember, is that almost none of the campaigning really seems to be about trying to attract even the swing voter. There's such a vanishingly small pool of those because everyone is so encamped in their positions that they're pushing so hard. And you see this most obviously with Donald Trump doing the full round of bro podcasts from the Joe Rogans all the way to the incels. in order to try and mobilise this low propensity vote among young men, young white men. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is trying to maximise the women's vote, but it's, it all feels a bit like, we used to talk about for several elections we've had that missing million canard, this chimerical idea that there are 1 million New Zealand voters who are just waiting to be motivated to get off their sofas and come and vote. And whether or not, obviously this is a far more expensive and far better resourced version of that, but it'll be interesting to see whether or not it pans out. What do you think, Ben? Annabelle has picked Donald J. Trump to win. What are you saying? I know you've been studying the detail of different demographics in Kent County, Michigan. That's the kind of granular analysis you've been providing on your other podcast. What are you calling it?
Look, I mean, there's no way of knowing from the polls or the polling or the aggregate polling in the swing states. I read an interesting piece about poll herding the other day, about sort of, how pollsters, because there are adjustments and weightings that go into the polling itself, it's not just 1,000 random people, that those weightings and assumptions can, kind of end up sort of bringing the polls together because people are worried about anything that deviates from those, from the mass of polls being an outlier that doesn't have credibility. And so to a certain extent, they become sort of self-fulfilling. We've seen reasonably significant polling errors unexplained. Usually guess comes down to turnout, a propensity for turnout. In the last couple of elections, Nate Cohen did a good table which showed, what the result would be in those swing states if the polling error was consistent with 2022, in which case it's a Kamala walkover, or consistent with 2020's polling error, in which case it's a Donald Trump landslide. And, I guess we find out on the day, but, in the post-2016 world, all I have to go on is the sinking feeling.
It's so interesting too to read that, how Trump has made massive inroads with black men. This is just a few years post Black Lives Matter that he seems to have captured their support again, and also Latino men, at a time where, his rhetoric around immigration is so out the gate that he is appealing to those communities.
You're right, and the Democratic Party is severely broken, and there will be more attention being paid to that were it not for the fact that the Republican Party is so catastrophically broken. The system is. So Ben, you didn't come up with a pick. You need to come up with a pick. You just say a name.
I think it's pretty clear.
What did you say, Trump? So you're saying Trump. You said Trump.
On a Washington,
the guy with the megaphone.
Washington Post measure. I don't think we need to make an endorsement. I think it's pretty clear what I think.
We do need to make an endorsement. We do.
I think it's the John Key endorsement that's really going to get it over the line for him.
Yeah, that's the one that matters.
Yeah. He'd be chuffed about that. If Kamala had a ponytail, things may have been different. However.
Helicopter John. Did he endorse Donald Trump? Maybe. I think he said he'd vote for him again. Did he? I don't know. It's a curious thing. I think the pollsters have overcorrected, and Kamala Harris will win.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I got it wrong last time. Got it wrong. Brexit wrong. I mean, I get it all wrong.
I always get it wrong too, but not as wrong as Ben gets it.
Oh, you guys both said that Winston wouldn't get back in, and I said he would. I'm pretty sure that happened. Is that right? I hear that's what you remember, eh?
No, it's true.
That's how it went down.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go from American politics to the former MP in the New Zealand Parliament, Darleen Tana, no longer an MP. That was a bit of a funny wee whirlwind, wasn't it?
It was arduous, wasn't it?
Oh, it was hard work.
Exhausting.
The Green Party decided, after much hand-wringing and angsting and long Zoom calls with their membership and reading in great detail their various party constitutional
Crystal
requirements.
clutching.
Bit of crystal clutching, it's true. That they would in fact invoke the very law that they had so ardently opposed, so vociferously stood against,
But voted
through
for.
various generations, but voted for. But that's true, they did vote for it, didn't they? But voted for it with a series of speeches saying we're only doing this because we have to, and with the biggest pigs on their noses. I don't know. I think probably people will forget this. On the other hand, Annabelle, it is true that the Greens have a little bit of a holier-than-thou vibe going. And do we now just have to say, at a minimum, that they are as unholy as the rest of them?
Do they have a holier-than-thou vibe going?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
I actually think they've managed the situation as well as can be expected. I think if they hadn't used the waka jumping legislation to eject her from Parliament, that would have looked more hypocritical, having voted for it, than using it. Not to mention just the frustration that it would create amongst general New Zealand voters that someone who doesn't really have a mandate to be there remained there.
Ben Thomas.
I would love to find the person who was a potential Greens voter and outside Darleen Tana herself, who would be willing to stand up and say, look, I like the Greens and I like what they stand for, but I cannot stand for the fact that they have removed Darleen Tana from New Zealand's Parliament. I mean, it's just there is no one. It's I just don't think. I mean, if even the membership could be convinced to basically reach consensus on it, or the membership delegates, and there were a few reservations, sort of, we agree with the other people's decision, but we don't necessarily go with it. I think the wider public would be completely unaffected by this. Most people already think that leaders.
Yeah, but that's true of so many things, Ben. You can't just say, this won't play with the typical voter. That's true of most of the stuff we talk about on this podcast.
No, sure, I know.
It's not
But
an important question of principle.
When the question is framed as, will this hurt the Greens for being hypocrites? The answer is just so obviously no that I don't know why people spend time with it. In the end, Chloe Swarbrick has been totally vindicated. I thought she was fucking around for way too long, but in the end, she managed to carry the membership with her pretty much completely. Their polling has stayed up and I think even improved on most measures a little bit, thanks to Labour sort of being a bit missing in action.
Almost as good as Tops.
And
oh yeah, we could do a special podcast on top.
Sorry.
And so I think they were totally vindicated. I mean, I think the visceral sort of opposition to that law in particular came out of very particular historical circumstances.
Yep.
Which was that when the Greens Green MPs originally entered Parliament as alliance MPs on the list, but they understood the alliance to be a federation of independent parties, whereas Jim Anderton, the leader of the alliance in New Labour, thought that the alliance was his party. And when they said that they wanted to caucus together and decided their own votes and not be dictated by the alliance caucus, Anderton went feral, and he was the driving force behind the waka jumping legislation, along with Winston Peters. And so for Rod Donald, when this law the original version of this law was adopted at the end of 1999, first thing that the new Helen Clark government, supported by the Alliance and the Greens, supported by the Alliance was try and pass this law. So if you go back and read the debate, incredibly intemperate, throwing around slavery, Nazism, fascism, and because it was so personal and so raw at the time, but if it had its genesis in any other sort of way, it simply would have been something that they did. We were like, we disagree with, as opposed to the strikes at the very heart of our party. Because at the time it was an existential threat, and or it had the echoes of that. And so, and I think obviously, the sort of legacy of Rod Donald, because of his tragic early passing, kind of contributed to that status within the party. but I think that gave it a kind of a false sort of significance to where it would actually sort of stand.
Yeah, and also a very practical point about the potential for new parties to be founded on principle and on philosophy by people who splinter away. And there is no sense in which Darleen Tana was standing up on a point of policy, a point of political philosophy, a point of moral principle. It was,
she might have been.
The antithesis of that.
You know, she may have seen the process the Greens had to go through to get rid of her and say, you know, my husband is a small business owner. You know, he couldn't deal with all this red tape. You know, of course he had to withhold pay.
Yeah, that's right. She was backing the Ministry for Regulation. But the other thing that was important in this was, you know, Chloe Swarbrick getting that, you know, resounding support, but also backed in that special general meeting by not just Kevin Haig, but Mitiria Ture, who has been doing other stuff for a long while. So I imagine the kind of that had a pretty big persuasive element, if there was any required, in terms of the mana enhancement scale.
Definitely.
17 years ago, Sarah Sheriff sat in a Whistler cafe on a mission to spot just one icebreaker jacket in the crowd. Today, they're everywhere. But for New Zealand brands like Icebreaker, Whitakers and Fix and Fog, going global took more than just great innovation and good luck. The right market can mean success. The wrong one can waste time, money and momentum. Right now on The Spin-Off, Joel McManus looks at what it takes to get it right and how New Zealand Trade and Enterprise can help your brand reach the world. Read the full story at thespinoff.co.nz/export. This week on The Spin-Off, we're releasing our most ambitious pop culture project yet. Are you ready? Introducing the top 100 New Zealand TV shows of the 21st century. Our panel of experts and in-house couch potatoes have pulled together a list of countless shows, whittled them down to the final 100 and set about composing this love letter to a quarter century of local television. The countdown is on to number 1. Read now on thespinoff.co.nz.
Let's move along to another important figure in New Zealand politics, from Darleen Tana to Richard Prebble, who not many people, I think, were expecting to see the announcement of a new appointment to the Waitangi Tribunal, Richard Prebble. Take us to the moment, Annabelle, when you saw that announcement. What was your, how did that land?
You messaged it to me.
I did. I should have. I wish I'd been there with the camera.
And I went, like that.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Okay, yeah. How about you, Ben? What was your, talk us through your, this exciting real time.
I thought a beautiful symmetry. Richard Prebble was the State-Owned Enterprises Minister under the fourth Labour government. Mm-hmm. Of course, it was the State-Owned Enterprises Act, which had the first, everything done under this act should be consistent with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. That led to the lands case. That led to ultimately the modern treaty settlement process. So, in a way, Prebble has come full circle.
Fantastic episode 5 of Juggernaut. It's got a lot of that. He's
the sort of the. He's the father. He's really the father of the modern treaty settlement process.
Yes, he really is.
In the same way that Jordan Luck is probably the grandfather of some kid on the East Coast. Like he wasn't aware of it at the time. He just kind of happened.
Just to be clear, we have no evidence that Jordan Luck is the grandfather of any children in any regions of the country. No, that's fine. He's very much the Waitangi Tribune. In essence, isn't he?
He's obviously been put in as a sort of disruptor, right? Yeah. The tribunal, pretty well-trod territory. New Zealand First, ACT have both criticised the tribunal for sort of overreach.
For mission creep, is their view.
There's certainly an argument to be made, and
the truth of the matter is that the Waitangi Tribunal was only latterly, in that fourth Labour government extended so that it could consider historic settlements with iwi. It was its original purpose was to consider contemporary issues. What do you reckon, Annabelle? The Prebble as well. Looking around, he in 2002 when he was leader of ACT, went up climbed up One Tree Hill and planted a pahutakawa. I'm not sure if he was, when that was in the news, and he announced that it should be one law for all Tree Hill. The one law for all tree. You see what he did there? And that the tribunal should be wound up after the final settlements were completed.
In a real sense, I don't think it will have much of an impact on the work of the tribunal. I mean, if he's been put there to be a disruptor, it might make certain hearings and stuff like drag on longer than necessary. But he, I think, is going to be the only former MP of the current tribunal members. There's actually been very few former MPs ever put on the tribunal, and I think that it's probably a good idea that you don't have former MPs and ministers on the tribunal. I think, ironically, in my view, probably both of his brothers would have had more to offer, his Mark, who is head of state services, and his other brother, who I think is like a law lecturer at Victoria University. But interestingly, him and Tama have had Tama Pōtaka have had some interactions before, because years ago, Tama represented an iwi who lost a lot of their treaty settlement in a land deal in Tūrangi that actually involved Richard Prebble. He was one of the partners that went into it. So they've got some experience of dealing with each other. I personally don't think it's a good idea to load up tribunals with politicians, be they Labour, National, whatever. I think that you should be looking for skills-based experience and open minds to be on to serve on the tribunal.
I think that as the tribunal does sort of widen the ambit of things that it's looking at, it's now doing these sort of exhaustive, real-time sort of examinations of policy. I think that you probably do want to expand the skill set that is on there, in the sense that, right now it is mostly historians or former treaty lawyers. And I think that measuring things against the principles of the treaty is actually a pretty easy enough exercise. But, these long sort of strange decisions they make, like, in the water case with the sell down of the state-owned enterprise electricity generators, they sort of came up with this new kind of Companies Act alternative, which they just put in their interim reports, and like, just an idea, And I think if they're going to start looking at commercial things like that, you probably do want a bit more expertise in those kinds of areas, so that you don't have a bunch of people with no experience in that kind of trying to get to grips with it from first principles. But I don't think it'll have much impact in the sense that this is not the first government that has sort of tried to put, I guess, what you might call disruptors into things like the tribunal or boards. The arts board. There's been a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth that Philip Crump has gone on the board of New Zealand On Air. But what usually happens is, lacking a critical mass, particularly on the tribunal, where the Māori Land Court judge, who's the convener, sets the sort of procedure, you end up sort of in these long, boring hearings or meetings, if it's a Crown entity or something like that, and you don't enjoy it. It's not fun. It's difficult to get to grips with if you're not engaged with it. You find yourself outnumbered by people who are very much institutionalized, and by and large, these people just stop going, right? Because it's just not a fulfilling experience for them. I would have thought the tribunal was sort of case in point with that. You say Prebble Prebble's presence might make hearings go longer than they would otherwise, and that just made me break out in a cold sweat. I mean, the tribunal is certainly not lacking in lengthy and involved hearings right now. So, I just can't. You'd need a lot of stamina to be a determined disruptor on these things.
Consistent with the disruptor theme, who do you reckon they might then put in as the observer for the Wellington City Council, where the sort of elements of dysfunction within the council and their inability to agree a long-term plan have meant that Simeon Brown, the local government minister, has decided to appoint an observer? Maybe Richard Prebble could do that too. Roger Douglas.
Well, I read an excellent column the other week. About and the conceit was the observation makes a difference, and there are these cognitive psych tests which are studies that show or suggest that when you have honesty boxes in offices, if you even have a sign asking people to do the dishes in the company kitchen or something, if you even have 2 cartoon eyes or something, or 2 disembodied photos of eyes or something, people are more likely to do it because they're sort of conscious of this idea of being observed. And if you look at the Wellington City Council, now they're suddenly having all these meetings where they're working constructively together on the long-term plan. So maybe you just put up a scarecrow in the lobby.
Well, they put up, they had Quasi, the big hand with the eyes on it, and that was overlooking, unfortunately, the disused Wellington City Council buildings because of earthquake strengthening. They should just put Quasi up there on the terrace. Bish bosh, job done.
I reckon you need someone who has really good interpersonal skills, great strategy, all of those sorts of things. I reckon the guy that won the latest Celebrity Treasure Island would be my pick.
Right. Yeah. That guy, whose name I forget.
JP.
He's lovely.
Obviously.
The moving swiftly across in our odyssey over Ben Thomas's political landscape, we arrive at Andrew Bailey. Now, it's a very hackneyed...
At the end of a long vineyard tour, we arrive at Andrew Bailey.
Hackneyed and overused comparison in all political punditry to say it's just like something out of the thick of it. This is just like something out of the thick of it.
Can you remind us what he said?
He was at a vineyard in Blenheim, I believe, and was it Spy Valley? And he was there towards the end of the day. And
in a personal capacity, or
I think he was there as the minister.
The minister of small business.
The minister of beverages. Sorry.
Minister for small
businesses.
And
beverages.
he said to a worker who didn't want to come with them for a drink to the tasting room or something like that. Am I getting this right? He said, why don't you fuck off home with a bottle of wine, you loser? And variations on that. And then, this is important. He also placed his hand on his forehead.
On the forehead, on his own forehead like that?
On his own forehead. And people who were suggesting that he'd been drinking, and he was very clear he hadn't, after it was very unclear that he hadn't. He wouldn't necessarily, if you'd been drinking, can you identify the first letter of the word loser? I don't think so. L for loser. In the workplace, the Minister for Small Business. And there were various other, you probably know more of the detail of this, Ben.
So the account in the letter, I'm not sure I find the letter convincing, because by my count, he would have had to have called him a loser about 8 times at least, which, I mean, maybe, who knows? But so the account, which seems to be reasonably settled on, is that he was doing a tour with the sort of bosses, the official welcome party. As is the case with these tours, sometimes you go onto the ground, you see the engine room, and you'll walk past somebody who's actually doing work, right? There'll be 1 or 2 people. And there's a script for this, right? You go in, and as you're walking past, you stop by and you say, hello, I'm Andrew Bailey, or whatever, I'm the Minister of Small Business. Are you the only one who does any work around here while these guys slack off? And then you point at the bosses that you're with, and you go, and they go, and the worker goes, and then you move on, right? And look, sometimes it's like actually in The Loop, where Malcolm Tucker is going like, war is neither foreseeable or unforeseeable, and the minister says, war is not currently foreseeable, and he's like, learn the line, and this is one where Bailey, he just needed to learn the line. Instead, he started improving, and
He'd been studying the wrong program and looking at Slough and Ricky Gervais instead.
He found himself on unsure ground, and then he tried, and yeah, this is, there's things are cliches for a reason. Right?
So you're suggesting he thought, this isn't really working. I'm not getting that kind of congenial laughter. Maybe I'll double down and then I'll go more. Maybe I just need to call him a loser another time.
Yeah. You're sort of like, so he comes by, he's like, are you the only one who does any work around here? And then he's like, what comes next? Slacker. Is it because you're a loser?
This was a bit of a Friday afternoon wonder, and I suppose one of the things that happens very often in these examples is there was a possibility there for a while that we might have a second by-election in Port Waikato within 18 months, which would have been fun. But who is Andrew Bailey? Did he sort of cock this one up as Ben says, miss the scripting, or is this a pattern of behaviour? And it's one of those things where you wait over the course of the next week to 2 weeks for other examples of, oh yeah, he also came to get his warrant done at my mechanics and he did blah, blah, blah. Or he also, sent an email to the school's board of trustees that was, or whatever. And so far, none of those things, to the best of my knowledge, have cropped up. And you probably think, well, this was a very embarrassing afternoon for Andrew Bailey, and that's probably about that, Annabelle?
I think it's more of a problem for the PM than it is for Bailey, because, I think quite a lot of New Zealanders probably didn't know much about Andrew Bailey before this incident. But I think Luxon's decision not to take more strident action in the face of some pretty brazenly revolting behaviour reflects more badly on him than it does on Bailey himself.
I bumped into a former national minister quite shortly afterwards who said that John Key would have sacked him within half an hour, and that would have been that. The reality for poor old Andrew Bailey is that in the next reshuffle he might find that he has rather less work on his plate than he used to.
Well, he was the lowest ranked national minister outside cabinet, and he's a veteran. He's been around for a long time. He was number 3 under Judith Collins. He was a Judith Collins ally.
That's right. He had that weird position when they had a treasurer. Yeah,
shadow treasurer.
That was interesting.
And I think he was always probably destined to slip off the list at the reshuffle. And this probably won't have changed too many minds about that. At the same time, I think Luxon sort of handled it reasonably well. Unless there was sort of any, like you say, any evidence that this is kind of a pattern or was malicious rather than just extremely ill judged. But I think having made that call, he had to stick with it. If he had then sacked Bailey, that would have just kept it going for much longer, and I don't think would have been deserved. I think it was just,
who of us hasn't told a random stranger to fuck off, loser, in our professional capacity? I mean, I personally quite often.
You really?
Yeah.
But that's in the workplace.
That's only in the workplace.
Yeah. Moving effortlessly from one ill-judged action involving booze to another ill-judged action involving booze. Just quickly, this story is just sort of breaking this morning. We're just talking about it. We might touch on it. Mike King has defended the role of alcohol in mental health in New Zealand, saying that actually alcohol is a bit of a life jacket for people in distress. Seemed quite unusual, odd remarks. Remembering, of course, that Mike King's organisation, Gumboot Friday, has got this unusual direct funding, talking about, like shoeies and gumboots is the way forward. Ben, you're in bits there.
I mean, yeah. So it's a life jacket for people in psychological distress, and it's like maybe if the cause of their psychological distress is that they are lost and isolated in the Alps and have just been found by a Saint Bernard, it's like it's just. Like it's pretty funny. It's like, he's like, for a lot of people, alcohol is a real comfort for the mentally unwell. It's like, yeah, it's called self-medication. It's really
kind
not
of
really
when we directed $24 million of public money specifically for Mike King's organisation, we did not expect it to be distributed.
I felt like Andrew Bailey's visit would have gone better if he'd had Mike King alongside him.
Yes, yeah.
Would have just smoothed everything over. It's extraordinary to me. I remember about 5 years ago on the Hui, we went and recorded a speech that Mike King delivered at Whanganui College to the students there, and the school had recently experienced the suicide of a much loved member of their student body, and he gave the most extraordinary, incredible kōrero to those kids. And one of the things that he really stressed was how destructive alcohol is when it comes to our mental health. He talked a lot about the inner critic and how alcohol amplifies the voice of your inner critic and how destructive that is. And he talked about his own personal experience and said how, when you're struggling with mental health, your mind is like a boiling pot. And when you put alcohol, when you have alcohol, that's like putting a lid on the boiling pot where everything just ultimately bubbles over. So it's so strange to me to hear him talking about alcohol in those terms, just completely off-brand. And, for someone who does have this extraordinary funding situation where he's essentially got like an IV line of funding into his organisation where you don't have to jump through any loops, it's just really surprising and a little bit concerning to hear that.
The 21st funnel of funding.
Can I just make a final suggestion, which is to the creative geniuses who decided the way to promote TUI in the year 2024 was to bring back those ads. If they really want to be edgy, they should put on one of those new billboards, alcohol is the life jacket for people in mental distress.
Nice.
Look forward to that. That's all. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.